Hello, happy week after spring break. Today we're going to read a story that helps us look at sequence of events. That means we look at the story and it helps us understand the story when we look at what happened first, next, and last. It's an important skill for helping us understand what we read. So, looking at the sequence of events, because if things are out of order, it's hard to understand a story. Alright, we're going to do that with a fun book called The Adventures of Beekle the Unimaginary Friend. Now, I've heard of an imaginary friend. That would be somebody that you imagine that isn't real. And a lot of us had imaginary friends as kids or have imaginary friends. This is an unimaginary friend, so I wonder how they're going to make that, because un means not. So I wonder how that's going to be. This is by Dan Santat. Beekle the Unimaginary Friend. Oh, all the illustrations in here are mixed media. It means they use colored pencils and oil pastels and watercolors and all sorts of different ways to make these really bright colors and really vibrant pictures. So here's the end pages. I'm noticing that there's lots of different imaginary friends that aren't real but look really cool. And then they also have their child that imagined them. Except for Beekle. He's on his own. I think that gives us a clue as to what's going to happen. So Beekle, the Unimaginary Friend. He was born on an island far away where imaginary friends were created. Here they lived and played, each eagerly awaiting to be imagined by a real child. I wonder if you have an imaginary friend. Every night he stood under the stars, hoping for his turn to be picked by a child and given a special name. He waited for many nights. Looks like that one that looks like kind of like a cat got picked or imagined by a child. But his turn never came. His mind filled with the thoughts of all the amazing things that were keeping his friend from imagining him. Maybe they're just busy. So rather than waiting, he did the unimaginable. Things that maybe you wouldn't even think of doing. Unimaginable. Looks like he's in a boat. He sailed through unknown waters and faced many scary things. But thinking about his friend gave him the courage to journey on. Until he reached the real world. I'm noticing that the real world is mostly in grays and blacks and whites. A little bit of blue. His boat still has bright colors, though. The real world was a strange place. No kids were eating cake. No one stopped to hear the music, and everyone needed nap time. Then he finally saw something familiar, so he followed. He had a good feeling about this place. Well, if I follow the dots, I see a picture of him here, and he went up and down the slide, he went over here. Following the picture, I don't think there's many Beekles. I think they're just showing all the places he went looking. He had a good feeling about this place, but he looked everywhere, and he couldn't find his friend. That's too bad. He climbed to the top of the tree and looked out, wishing and hoping his friend would come. But no one came. Noticing he's still sitting up there on his own. He thought about how far he'd come and how long he'd waited, and felt very sad. Then he heard a noise from below. Hello? There's no words on this page. I think you can just see what's happening in the picture. She handed him a note. Oh, look. Her face was friendly and familiar, and there was something about her that felt just right. She's never met him before, but there he is in her picture. I wonder if she imagined him. At first, they weren't sure what to do. Neither of them had made a friend before, but after a little while, says Alice, they realized Beekle. They were perfect together. Beekle. Hi, Beekle. Beekle and Alice had many new adventures. They shared their snacks. They told funny jokes. The world began to feel a little less strange. And together, they did the unimaginable, the things you don't easily think of, things you don't imagine very easily, the unimaginable. And that's the end of the story. Now, I noticed something about the end pages, though. Before, just like before, we had all the imaginary friends and the kids who imagine them. But now Beekle has Alice, which is pretty cool. There's the front of the book. There's the back of the book. Like I said, I wonder if you have an imaginary friend. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend named Anne. She, to me, looked like a regular kid, maybe a little bit smaller, and she had short hair, and I thought she had the superpower that she could disappear and reappear and climb trees really well. But she wasn't real, she was an imaginary friend. Alright, so let's look at the sequence of events to help us understand our story. So when we do sequence of events, we look at what happened at the beginning, next, and last. You could do more steps than that, but we'll just keep it simple today. So I have some pictures. I know at one part of the story he went to the real world. I know at another part of the story he was alone and he'd not yet been imagined. Poor guy. And I know at another part of the story he found a friend who imagined him. So now we're going to take a look at all three and see what we think happened first in our story, next in our story, and last in our story. Let's take a look here. I have more cards than hands. That makes it a little difficult. What do you think happened first? What would make sense in our story? Well, I would say alone and not yet imagined would make sense to be first, because if he's imagined, that can't come before. He's got to first be alone and not yet imagined, because that'll happen later. Alright, so I'm going to say alone and not yet imagined is number one, the first thing that happens in our story. Now, what comes next? Is it finding the friend? Is it going to the real world? Which would make sense? Did he find his friend and they went to the real world together? No, because he was in the real world when he found her. So I think he went to the real world first, and then he found his friend. Does that sound right to you? It sounds right to me. It helps our story make sense to understand what happened first, and then what happened later. So we would say that first he was not yet imagined, then he went to the real world, and in the end, he found his friend. That's a sequence of events for this story. So if you're ever having trouble understanding a story that you're reading, try to think about, well, what happened first? And does that help me understand what's happening now in my story or at the end? And that can help you understand what you're reading. All right. Hope you enjoyed Beekle the Unimaginary Friend, and hope you're having a good first day back from spring break.